Sorry, I didn't know you'd be here.
I was running from my ex, when by accident, I bumped into a Mafia boss. It was supposed to be a quick delivery, an 18th century manuscript, a 5-star hotel, a coffee on the way back home. But he was in the lobby, my ex, and he was coming toward me as if he still had some claim over me. I ran to the nearest elevator, stepped in without looking at who was inside, and asked the stranger in the black suit for help. "Pretend you know me." He pretended. He wrapped my waist with the calm of a man who had never needed to repeat an order in his life, and stared down my ex like someone choosing a cemetery address. My ex backed off in the same second. I laughed out of nerves. The man didn't laugh. When the elevator door closed, he didn't let go of my waist. And when the hotel manager turned pale and called him Don, I understood. I had just traded a known problem for a much worse one. And that man didn't seem willing to let go of me anytime soon. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Delivery. She shouldn't have accepted the bakery opened at 6:30. I walked in at 6:32, always, because those 2 minutes of being late were the only vanity I allowed myself in Paris. The clerk in the gray apron already had the coffee ready before I set the coin on the counter, and the bread came out of the oven with that absurd smell of a possible morning. It was the ritual that held the rest together. I pushed my glasses back into place with the knuckle of my finger, and they slid back crooked, as always, because the left arm had given out one Philadelphia winter, and I'd never taken them to a decent optician. They were cheaper crooked, and secretly, I liked to think it was a warning to others. A woman with crooked glasses probably had a crooked life too. Better not to expect much. Le Marais was still asleep. The narrow alleys smelled of wet stone, and I crossed 3 of them with the manuscript folder pressed firm against my chest, my other hand around the hot paper cup. Tiny apartment on the 4th floor of a building with no elevator. Upstairs neighbor who played piano at the wrong hours. Single pane window that wouldn't shut properly. To me, it was the most discreet palace in the world. Nobody knew the address. Not even my boss. I crossed the city on the metro that smelled of bad coffee, and opened the Belregard's door at 7:45. The rare book house sat on a narrow ground floor, with a heavy curtain in the window so the sun wouldn't ruin the antique bindings. Madame Aurélie was already there, of course. The boss seemed to never sleep, or to sleep standing up, or to have made a private deal with the clock. Short white hair, reading glasses on the tip of her nose. The kind of woman who said good morning, like she was saying, make up your mind already. Zoe, Aurélie looked up from the catalog. I need a favor that pays better than your dignity would accept on any other day. I set the folder on the leather counter and slipped off my coat slowly. My dignity has been officially unemployed since I traded Philadelphia for a moldy attic. Tell me, the 18th century manuscript we cataloged in July. The buyer arrived in Paris yesterday and doesn't trust couriers. He wants hand delivery. Where? Plaza Athénée. I drew in a breath in a way I hoped would seem professional, and that probably came out as what it was. Mild panic from a girl who knew that a 5-star hotel had doors too heavy for someone who still counted pennies at the end of the month. But pride spoke first, as it always did, and I heard my own voice say I was fine, that I'd handle it, that I'd be back before lunch. Aurélie watched me over her glasses a second longer than she needed to. Take a cab. I'll pay. A dry pause. And eat something before you go, dear. A 5-star hotel eats anyone who walks in hungry. I laughed despite myself. It was the Aurélie effect. The boss spoke like someone serving tea, and the tea always had a needle in it. The folder with the manuscript got a dark velvet cover, cotton gloves inside, in an inner pocket, letterhead receipts, folded into quarters. I organized everything with the obsessive precision of someone who had learned, at some point in life, that the chaos out there could be held back if the chaos of one's own hands was tidied first. I didn't think of Bastien Lefebvre when I accepted. I only thought of him in the cab, when the thought came. Dense, the way it always came. Bastien, the French ex-fiancé I had lived with in Paris during my study abroad year, and who, later, became the concrete reason I came back to Paris 2 years ago, instead of continuing to run from him through Philadelphia. Son of an influential lawyer, name in gilt letters on offices on Rue Cambon, the smile of a man who had learned early that no one crosses him. He humiliated me at his parents' dinners, listed my mistakes in French out loud so I'd have to laugh along. He watched my phone, picked my clothes, decided who I could see. When I broke things off, he laughed. He said I'd come back. I didn't go back. But I slept, for 10 years with the hallway light on. With my dead father's, too. They were the same light, really. I'd only understood that once, in the dark, and unlearned it right after. The cab stopped in front of the pale stone facade of the Plaza Athénée. Red awnings, geraniums in enormous pots, doormen in white gloves. I took a deep breath, adjusted my crooked glasses without straightening them, raised the folder like someone raising a fake ID, and walked in. The lobby had a high ceiling, marble that threw the sound of heels back as if the hotel wanted to announce each guest out loud. Heavy chandelier, receptionist with an impeccable bun, a discreet scent of jasmine and money. I approached the counter, spoke in French, asked them to inform the gentleman who was waiting for the material from Belregard. The receptionist typed something, smiled, asked me to wait a moment, and it was in that moment that I heard a laugh I knew by heart. The laugh came from the corridor that led to the restaurant. Deep, happy, the laugh of a man who felt at home under every roof in the world. Bastian. He was crossing the lobby with a colleague in a suit, one hand shoved in his pocket, the other on his friend's shoulder, and was telling some story, laughing at himself in a way I remembered with the clarity of a nightmare. The whole lobby seemed to shrink. He hadn't seen me. Yet. He was about 20 meters away, turned 3/4, his profile cutting the light coming down from the chandelier. If he turned 5 more degrees, his eyes would cut across the dark velvet folder, and the woman in crooked glasses glued to the counter, as if the counter could swallow her. I stopped breathing in a very specific way that only a woman who has run from a man like this knows. The receptionist was saying something about the 4th floor. I didn't hear. My brain had become an escape map. Back door on the left, kitchen door probably behind that curtain, service stairs if there were any, bathroom, any corner. But the fastest way to disappear from his line of sight was a short corridor, on the right, with 3 elevators with mirrored doors. I said, "Merci," without hearing it, turned with the folder, and walked toward the elevator with the deliberate calm of a woman who knows that running draws the eye. The end elevator was open, empty inside on first red, the back mirror still holding the reflection of the previous guest moving away. I stepped in, hit some floor, anything. The 5th, maybe, because it was the number closest to my thumb, and turned toward the door with the folder pressed to my chest. Bastian's laugh crossed the lobby again, closer now. Close, I whispered, to the door, to Paris, to God if God had patience for terrified women. Close, close, close. The door began to move slowly, the way doors in expensive hotels move, as if time in there cost more. That was when I noticed, in the back mirror, that I wasn't alone. A dark shape filled half the mirror behind me. Broad shoulders, dark suit, a tall man I had walked past without seeing because my brain was spinning around Bastian and there was no attention left for anyone else. I froze for a second. Bastian's laugh sounded even closer, in the short corridor now, coming toward the elevators. I turned only half my face toward the man behind me, saw a line of jaw, saw the expensive watch on the wrist resting on his thigh, saw the absolute silence with which he occupied the space, and the door still hadn't closed. Chapter 2. Pretend You Know Me. I spun around all at once. I didn't think. Thinking had switched off back there. The moment I recognized the laugh, my body decided before my head, and my body decided one thing only, one specific thing, the only thing that made sense for someone who had lived 10 years with the hallway light on. Turn the X into a public lie before he turned me into a private headline. I took a big step back, bumped into the stranger's chest, dropped half of the manuscripts from the folder onto the marble floor, and heard my own whisper coming out in 3 languages that tripped over each other without permission. Pretend you know me. Please. Je t'en prie. Pretend, please. The man's chest was made of stone, not in the pretty sense, in the literal sense. I bumped him, and the man didn't move a millimeter, as if I had walked into a column of the hotel. Before he could answer, before he could refuse, before the entire universe could have the chance to say no, I stretched up onto my toes and pressed an awkward kiss. Wrong. Fumbling. Against the angle of his jaw, exactly as the elevator door reached the halfway point, and Bastian, on the other side, crossed the short corridor and looked in. It was a 1/10 of a second. In that 1/10 of a second, 3 things happened. Bastian saw. I felt my heart climb to my collarbone. And the stranger, instead of pushing me away, did the opposite. His hand, enormous, calm, slid along my waist and closed there with a possession that hadn't been asked for, and that I, even dying of fear, felt as certainty. The other arm slipped behind my shoulders. His chin lowered close to my temple, as if that position were the position he held, every day, somewhere in the world, with some woman who had been his for a long time. And then he spoke. "Quella donna è mia," he said, low in Italian that flowed like ice melting on a silver spoon. "Faccia un altro passo e perderà la giornata, signore." I didn't speak Italian. I knew, vaguely, that Mia was mine. I knew, with clarity, that nobody needed a translation to understand what that tone meant. It was the voice of a man who decided cemetery addresses over breakfast. Bastian stopped in the middle of the corridor. His eyes cut across me first. Surprise, then calculation, then cut across the stranger behind me, and there, exactly there, something in Bastian's shoulders that I knew by memory tightened. A small, almost invisible movement of a man who understood, without needing an explanation, that this floor of the hotel had just changed jurisdiction. He took a step back, then another. He raised his hands in a cocktail party surrender, smiled the fake smile I knew better than my own face, turned around, and disappeared down the corridor he had come from. The elevator door finished closing. I stood frozen, leaning into a man I had never seen before, with his hand still on my waist, and my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to be heard by the entire 10th floor. For 2 seconds, 3, 4, neither of us said anything. The elevator climbed in expensive silence. The smell of sandalwood and new car leather slipped into my breathing. Then the nerves turned into laughter. It was stronger than me. "Oh my God," I started, in English, then switched to French. "Mon Dieu, I'm so sorry. Je suis désolé. I'm so embarrassed. I swear I don't normally jump on strangers in elevators. I swear I'm a functional person. Actually, no, I'm not. But I swear this is the worst day of my serviceable life. I promise I'll get off at the next floor and never appear again." I gave 2 short, high laughs, the kind a woman gives when the body knows it needs to laugh so it won't cry. I tried to step away. His hand didn't let go. Not with force. It was worse than with force. It was with the calm of a man who had decided, in a span of time shorter than the one I'd taken to invent 2 laughs, that the waist under his palm wasn't moving from there until further notice. I stopped laughing. I lifted my face. For the first time, I looked. He was a man around 34, maybe, with dark hair cut short, a tiny scar on one of his eyebrows that looked old, eyes the color of olive kept in the dark, and a mouth that wasn't smiling. The suit was dark, matte, sewn by someone who charged by the hour. The cuff of the shirt, which I only saw because his hand was still on my waist, had embroidery so discreet that I only noticed through the training of someone who worked with old fabrics, a small crest. He asked in English with a soft accent, the first thing he said to me in a language I could understand. "What's your name?" "Zoe." The voice came out steadier than I expected. He waited for a last name. I didn't give one. He tilted his head a half millimeter, in a gesture that could have been respect or calculation, and slowly, in a way that wasn't meant to reassure me, but to make it clear that he was letting go because he chose to let go, opened his hand and took it off my waist. The elevator stopped on the 5th floor. The door opened onto a corridor of thick carpet, pale wallpaper, floor lamps lit at midday. A man in a dark suit was standing in front of the door. I registered the touchstone first. The man in the corridor had exactly the same tiny crest on his cuff. Behind the man in the corridor, coming from the other side, the hotel manager appeared. He was a thin guy, French to the marrow, his 5-star hotel tie crooked from haste. When he saw the man next to me, the blood left his face as if someone had turned on a tap. His 2 hands rose to mid-chest and stayed there, paralyzed. His mouth opened. Don Castellaneta. Buongiorno, sir." I wasn't informed that. "I offer sincere apologies. It was an oversight. I personally will." I heard the word, and heard, in the next second, the silence of the waiter coming down the corridor with a tray, and who, without the slightest ceremony, did an about-face with the entire tray, and disappeared through the service door as if he'd left the oven on at home. I heard the receptionist on the 5th floor, on the right, place an internal call so quietly that it was impossible to make out the words, but possible to make out the dread. Don Castellaneta. I didn't follow Italian news. But, as a woman who had lived in Philadelphia, a woman who had worked 2 summers in the manuscript section of a university that received donations from families with Italian last names and questions nobody asked, I had read, In some cafe newsroom, in some newspaper open on the metro, in some book I had catalogued. That last name, Castellaneta, Cosa Nostra, Sicily, Dawn. The velvet folder, on the floor, with half of the 18th century manuscript scattered between his shoes and mine, suddenly became the most absurd detail of the day. I started, and the voice came out small for the first time since the bakery. I have to go. The man in the corridor, capo, soldier, I still didn't have the vocabulary, knelt in silence and started gathering the manuscripts with a librarian's care. Enormous hands, a delicate gesture. I registered that without understanding what registering meant. Giorgio Castellaneta didn't answer my line. He looked at the manager. The reservation for the Blue Salon for dinner. Move it to the private room on the 8th. Low voice, no emphasis. For 7 people now, and the room to the right of mine. Free it up. Immediately, Don. Vincenzo, he said, and the man kneeling on the floor looked up without rising. The signorina's folder comes with me. Vincenzo finished gathering everything, closed the dark velvet with the precision of someone who had closed more dangerous briefcases, and stood up. He had dark hair graying at the temples, in his early 40s, the face of a man who had seen absolutely everything and had decided to comment on nothing. Yes, Don. I waited for someone to laugh, for someone to say, hidden camera, for Paris to be Paris and the afternoon to go back to being the afternoon of the boring delivery with the cab fare paid. No one laughed. I need to get back to Belregard, I said, and this time I tried to put firmness into it. The voice of the woman in crooked glasses who learned to talk tough in 3 languages so no one would notice she was afraid. My boss is waiting for me. I made the wrong delivery. Actually, I pressed the wrong button. There was a man in the lobby. It was a misunderstanding, really. I can go down by the service stairs. I don't even need to go through the lobby again. If you could just ask someone to point me to the back exit. Giorgio listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. He waited for me to finish, like someone waiting for a child to finish explaining her drawing. When I stopped, he lowered his eyes to the spot on my waist where his hand had been a minute before, then looked back at my face. Quel homme, he said, and it was the first time he used French in front of me. That man saw my face. He doesn't know you, I answered, tripping over the words. He has nothing to do with this. He saw me touch you. Giorgio tilted his head slightly. In 2 hours, he'll know my name. In 4, he'll know what business I came to do in Paris. In 6, someone will offer information about you for money. And in 8, signorina, either I've already put you somewhere where it doesn't matter, or someone puts you somewhere where it matters too much. I opened my mouth to answer, and discovered I had no answer in the first drawer. The back exit, he continued, patient, and it was the patience that scared me, leads to the same Paris where he lives. I can take care of myself, I said, and heard how the line sounded. It was the line that I had repeated to myself in front of the mirror for 2 years. He watched me a second longer than was appropriate. There was no contempt in the look. There was maybe something worse, recognition. As if he had heard that line before, in another woman's voice, in another decade, and knew exactly how long it took for it to stop being true. You threw yourself at me, signorina, he said, and the voice dropped half a tone. Now I decide where I put you. I felt the entire Italian of that line even spoken in English. I felt that the line was going to stay with me. I felt, with shameful clarity, that a very small and very inconvenient part of my chest had registered, beneath the fear, beneath the calculation, beneath the indignation, a vibration that was none of the 3. I hated that part. Vincenzo, Giorgio called without looking away from me. The car at the back. Exit through service. Pause. Call Belregard. Tell Madame Aurélie that Signorina Zoe was struck by a sudden indisposition, and that the 18th century material is in the hands of the buyer, with thanks. I opened my mouth to protest at the mention of Aurélie. I couldn't. The capo already had the phone to his ear, walking 2 steps behind, with the velvet folder tucked under his forearm, as if it were a small shotgun. Walk, said Giorgio, and it wasn't a rude order. It was worse. It was the kind of polite request a man like him made once. This way. I walked. My feet decided before my head. Again. The corridor of thick carpet swallowed the sound of my heels. We passed through the service door, took down a smaller elevator, came out into an underground garage with cold lighting, and there was a black car with dark windows pulled up, engine running, a driver standing at the open back door like in an old Sunday afternoon film. Where? I asked, getting in because I had nothing else to do, because the last 5 seconds had been decided by people other than me, and my voice, now, was a shamed whisper from a woman who had always prided herself on knowing how to say no. "Where are you taking me?" Giorgio got in beside me, closed the door with that softness of an expensive car, slipped a heavy watch off his cuff to check the time and put it back on his wrist without urgency. "To a place where Bastien Lefebvre won't get to before we do." The car pulled out of the garage. It took me a whole block to notice. Took me another to believe I had noticed. When I finally noticed, I turned my face toward him with my mouth dry. I hadn't said the last name. At no point in those 18 minutes, from the lobby to the car, had the word Lefebvre left my mouth. His hand rested on his thigh, the heavy watch on his wrist, his profile looking out at Paris through the window like someone choosing neighborhoods. I didn't ask. Not yet. The old instinct. The instinct of the 15-year-old girl who learned to write questions down in a notebook instead of asking them out loud in the kitchen, spoke first. "Keep this, Zoe. Keep it for later." I kept it. The car turned onto Avenue Montaigne and stopped at an underground gate. Vincenzo stepped out first, opened my door with a gesture that was courtesy and was, also, instruction. I got out. I followed the two of them into a private elevator that climbed without stopping at any floor, straight to the top, and when the door opened, the apartment swallowed me. It was too big, too silent, the kind of place where my voice was going to get lost before reaching the back wall, and I understood in that first minute that this wasn't protection, it was containment. I had traded a cage I knew for another I hadn't yet mapped. "Bedroom at the end of the hall," Giorgio said, slipping off his coat and tossing it onto a chair with the naturalness of someone who had lived there for a long time. "Private bathroom. Vincenzo stays on the floor. If you need anything, ask him. If you need to leave, ask me. And if I don't want to ask." He stopped, turned his face in my direction. There was no anger there, no explicit threat, but there was something worse. The patience of someone who wasn't used to explaining the same thing twice. "Then I'll find out anyway," he said, "and it'll be worse for both of us." I swallowed dryly. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, sat on the bed that was too big for one person, and looked at the ceiling for a length of time I couldn't measure. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury I saved for locked bathrooms, and that bathroom wasn't yet mine. On the first night, I didn't sleep. I lay there with my eyes open, listening to the building breathe, counting the sounds, footsteps in the hall every 40 minutes. Vincenzo, I deduced, because the rhythm was wide and heavy. A door opening and closing around 2. A low voice in Italian, far off, muffled by walls that cost more than everything I had ever owned combined. On the second morning, I found coffee on the kitchen counter, fresh bread, imported butter, and a note in tiny handwriting that simply said, "Back tonight. Don't open the door for anyone." The handwriting was beautiful, disciplined, the hand of a man who had learned to write in another century. I turned the note over. Nothing on the back. I tucked it into my pants pocket because it was the only proof that someone in that apartment knew I existed. On the second night, I tried the front door. It was unlocked. I turned the knob, opened it 3 centimeters, saw the corridor of the floor. Vincenzo was sitting in a chair 2 meters away, reading an Italian newspaper with his reading glasses on the tip of his nose. He raised his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His look said what the unlocked door meant. "You can leave, but I'm going with you, and he'll know." I closed the door. I went back to the bedroom. I picked up the little notebook I always carried in the bottom of my bag, the same little notebook where I noted restorations, where I drew folio stitches, where I had written down Aurélie's address on my first day in Paris, and started taking notes. Times, patrols, distance to the service stairs, number of doors in the corridor, the position of the camera in the elevator hall. I wasn't planning to escape. I was planning to survive. On the third day, he brought clothes. 2 bags from a store I would never have walked into of my own accord, with tags I didn't look at because I knew the number was going to hurt me. He set the bags on the living room table and didn't say gift, didn't say wear it, didn't say any of what a controlling man would say. He said, "Your clothes won't last the week. If anything doesn't fit, Vincenzo will exchange it. How long am I staying here? Until Bastien understands he can't reach you. And when will that be?" He looked at me with that dark olive look I was already starting to catalog, against my will, the way one catalogs a rare edition, studying the wear, the texture, the marks of use. "When I decide," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was fact. I took the bags, went to the bedroom, opened them. Black clothes, simple clothes, good cut, fabric that didn't make noise. No dress, no skirt, no sandals, only the kind of clothes a woman wears when she needs to move fast. I understood the message before unfolding the second piece, and the message wasn't be pretty. The message was, stay alive. Chapter 3. The Penthouse on Avenue Montaigne. 3 days inside that apartment, and I had already memorized the path the sun took on the living room rug between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. The penthouse on Avenue Montaigne was big in the wrong way. Its ceiling was too high for my voice. The windows ran from floor to ceiling and looked out onto the zinc roofs. The library held books cataloged by year. The leather sofa smelled of new cleaning. It was the kind of place where someone like me should have been hired to restore something, not installed like a problem to be put away. I had learned to count the minutes between the patrols. Vincenzo, Giorgio's man of trust who had gathered up my manuscripts in the elevator at the plaza, walked through the corridor every 40 minutes, soundlessly. The other one, younger, still nameless, stayed at the floor's reception. I had a little notebook in the back of the nightstand drawer, where I noted those times in the tiny handwriting I learned cataloging manuscripts. I wasn't waiting to be saved. I was calculating. I called Madame Aurélie that morning with the hoarsest voice I could put together. "The flu," I said, leaning my temple against the cold window. "The kind that takes your wits, madame. I won't be able to leave the house." There was a silence on the other end, the kind she used when she was about to let a sentence fall like a stone into still water. Madame Aurélie was a Frenchwoman with short white hair and a low voice, owner of Belleregard, and she was the woman closest to a mother that I had in Paris. "I imagined," she replied in a dry voice. "Take care, ma chère, and let me know when that flu of yours stops liking 5-star hotels." I closed my eyes. She knew. Not everything, maybe, but she knew that the flu story was a lie the size of the plaza's lobby. She didn't press. Aurélie had that way of offering a silence that felt more like care than question. "Madame," I said quietly. "Yes? Thank you. Don't thank me for a flu I didn't believe. Drink water, and come back whole." I hung up before my voice could betray me. I washed my own clothes in the bathroom that afternoon because I didn't have the head to let a strange housekeeper handle the only blouse I had brought from my apartment in Le Marais. The blouse barely fit in the marble sink. I laid everything out on the heated towel rack, watched the fabric drip. It was a small, stubborn gesture of a woman who didn't trust anyone, and I recognized it as my mother's inheritance, who had washed white handkerchiefs in the bathroom until she died, even with a good washer on the other side of the wall. That night, he showed up unannounced. I was in the library, barefoot on the rug, pretending to read some book with my crooked glasses sliding down my nose, when I heard the front door. Calm steps in the corridor. 2 pairs, one heavy, one silent. Vincenzo stayed in the doorway. Giorgio came in. He was carrying a small box of thin cardboard with a dark satin ribbon. He still had on the day's suit, no tie, his left sleeve folded up to the forearm, the look of someone who had come back from somewhere where he'd needed to seem more civil than he was. "Good evening, Signorina. Don Castellaneta." I said the title on purpose, with that sarcasm of mine that always picked the worst moment. He paused for half a second, amused, and set the box down on the little table between us. "Open it." "Is that an order?" "It's a request," he replied, and his low voice had that Sicilian timbre that went down the spine without permission. "I'll let you know when it's an order." I opened it. Inside the box, wrapped in clean butcher paper, was a rare edition of Les Fleurs du Mal by Baudelaire, cover in dark leather, visible stitching, paper of the kind that creaks at the fingertip. I recognized the edition in a second. I had mentioned this edition in passing to the manager of the Plaza Athénée on the afternoon of the elevator, while waiting for the cab and trying to seem composed. The manager hadn't even answered properly. I lifted my eyes. He was watching me in a way I had seen before, but not from him. From the collectors who walked into Belleregard knowing exactly which piece they wanted, and pretending they were just looking. "Do you buy forgiveness with first editions from every woman?" I asked, the book still in my hands. "Or only from the ones who kiss strangers in elevators?" He almost smiled. He didn't reach the full smile, but the corner of his mouth moved a touch, the way of someone who allows himself a rare luxury. "Only from the ones who throw themselves at me." "Declined," I said, lifting my chin. "I don't accept gifts from men who decide where I sleep." "Good." He took his hands out of his suit pockets and slid them both onto the back of the sofa, leaning his body forward a little. "You decline out loud, but you don't let go of the book." I looked at my hands. I hadn't let go. I was hugging the Baudelaire to my chest as if someone might come and take it. "That's different," I murmured. "That's literature." "Literature," he repeated without irony, as if conceding the point. "Wear something black. Working dinner. You're coming with me." "Am I?" "You are." "May I ask why?" He looked at me for a long second, from the crooked glasses to my bare feet, and the way he looked at me, I understood that he wasn't sizing me up. He was deciding how much to tell. "The Marchettis," he said slowly. "Alliance under negotiation. Bastien saw your face with me at the entrance of the plaza. If he has eyes on the street, and he does, he needs to keep believing that you are mine. You have dinner with me, talk with the matriarch, smile when I look at you. That's it. So I'm scenery. You're a shield," he corrected, and the word cut. "It's not the same thing." I swallowed the answer I had on the tip of my tongue. I went to the bedroom, picked the black dress that Vincenzo had brought on the first afternoon, lined up my glasses on my nose with a childish stubbornness. Even there, I refused to give up my crooked side, and went back to the living room. He was on the balcony, his back to me, looking at the roofs. A big man who didn't fill the space the way big men usually fill it. He filled it in silence, in the way of someone born accustomed to being looked down on by other men. "Ready," I said. He turned. He took a tenth of a second longer than usual to answer. I was amused inside, in the painful way one is amused at one's own foolishness. "Ready," he repeated. The armored car took us to a closed restaurant in Saint-Germain. The street had been evacuated with that very expensive discretion. 2 men on every corner, waiters in white gloves, wine open in the decanter before our coat had left our shoulder. The Marchetti matriarch sat at the head of the table. A woman of about 60, gray hair pulled into a low bun, hands full of antique rings. She greeted Giorgio in Italian, greeted me in French, looked at me through her glasses as if I were an auction page. I held her hand with the firmness I had learned from Madame Aurélie, and didn't blink. Tommaso Ferri was sitting 3 chairs over. It was the first time I heard his name said out loud. "Consigliere," Giorgio summarized for me on the way over. Older than Giorgio, thin, with eyebrows that looked drawn with a fine pencil, watchful eyes, he greeted me with exaggerated courtesy. "Signorina," he said in Italian. "What is your last name?" "Whitcomb. Whitcomb," he repeated slowly, savoring the 2 syllables. "English?" "American." "Ah," he sipped water. "Allow me to ask again, please. My ears aren't what they used to be. Whitcomb?" I looked at Giorgio. He had set his wine glass on the table with exact slowness, and his hand was no longer relaxed the way it had been 5 seconds before. "Whitcomb," I repeated gently, as if I were teaching a foreign word to a polite child. 1.5 syllables. Not worth hearing twice. The Marchetti matriarch laughed without sound. "I like her," she said to Giorgio in Italian, and turned back to me in French. "Do you work with books, signorina? Antique manuscripts? Belregard House." "Belregard!" Her rings jingled. "I've known Aurélie for 30 years. Did you restore that 15th century Venetian Psalter for the October auction?" "I did." I smiled, and the smile came out before I authorized it. The miniature of the opening capital almost crumbled in my hands. "Show me." I picked up the napkin, folded it as if it were a folio, explained the margin, the stitching, the pigment that had given way. The matriarch leaned in. We talked for 15 minutes, of antique copper pigment, of Marian miniatures, of Italian paper versus French paper. Giorgio, beside me, stopped eating. I felt him watching from the side, without needing to turn, and it was a look I had no recipe to read. When I came back to breathing the whole scene, I noticed 2 things. The matriarch had forgotten, for 15 minutes, the reason for that dinner. And Tommaso, 3 chairs over, had jotted something on a small card under his napkin. And a third thing, which I kept without understanding. At no point in the conversation had I mentioned the university in Philadelphia, the manuscript section, the summers in the archive. But when the matriarch asked if I worked with books, Giorgio didn't look at me with surprise. He didn't look like a man discovering new information about the woman who slept in his house. He looked like someone confirming a piece of data. In the car, on the way back, Giorgio was silent for half an entire avenue. "You did well," he said at last, without looking at me. "I'm trained scenery. You're not scenery." His hand was spread flat on the leather of the seat between the 2 of us. Mine was spread flat too on my side. At some point between the Pont des Invalides and Avenue George V, his pinky brushed mine. By accident, I told myself. But the word accident arrived late, after I had already decided not to move my hand. We went up together. Vincenzo wished us good night with the customary respect. Giorgio walked me down the corridor to the door of my bedroom, stopped at the threshold, turned his body sideways to let me pass. I passed. I looked at him. His eyes were lowered to my crooked glasses, and he stretched out his hand, slowly, stopping a centimeter from the frame, without touching it. He drew his hand back. "Good night, signorina." "Good night, Don Castellaneta." He didn't come in. I closed the door, I leaned my forehead against the cold wood, and I realized, with a start that left me without breath for 2 full seconds, that I had wanted him to come in, and it was exactly that wish that frightened me more than everything that had happened in that penthouse. Chapter 4. The Man at the Door. All night, a whole week had gone by inside that penthouse, and I already recognized the sound of his footsteps before they reached the end of the corridor. It was Sunday. Paris was sliding toward late afternoon in a soft way, that October gold that seemed to drip down the windows. I was on the balcony, with tea in a glass cup and my usual crooked glasses, and Giorgio had appeared without his suit, in a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the air of someone who had decided that day not to be donned for an hour. He leaned against the railing on my side, looking at the roofs, at a distance that allowed conversation, but not touch. "Your mother," he asked slowly, the way someone tests a thin floor, "is she from Philadelphia too?" I looked at him. I hadn't said where I was from. I had said Whitcomb at the dinner, had said American, but not Philadelphia. Or had I? I tried to rewind. Maybe I had said it in the car, maybe on the first day. In the 3 days I barely remembered. I must have. It was the simplest explanation. She was. The word came out before I decided. He turned his head a little, just enough to look at me sideways. "How long?" 8 years. I tightened my grip on the cup. My father went first. Car accident, I was 15. She died 2 years later. The doctors called it other things, but the truth is she died of sadness. She couldn't want to keep going anymore. He didn't interrupt. I had already learned that this was his most dangerous way of listening, without moving his face, without offering the ready-made line of condolences, letting the silence ask for the rest. She wanted to go to the Amalfi Coast. I continued quietly. She had a book of old photographs that she leafed through on Saturday mornings. Ravello, Positano, Capri. She said one day she'd go. She never went. I think Paris was the place where I arrived in her stead. He went silent. He looked at the roofs as if counting the zinc one by one. "Amalfi Coast," he repeated, in Italian, and the word took on weight in his mouth. "My father took me to Ravello when I was 12. There's a little white chapel leaning out over the sea. You think it's the size of a matchbox until you go in. Beautiful." "It is." I turned to him. The line of his jaw was tense, in a way that didn't match the conversation, didn't match longing, a fond memory, a father. It matched something else, a shoulder that carried a weight I couldn't see. He noticed I was looking. He let the shoulders drop. He smiled, sideways, and went back to being Don for half a second. "Drink your tea, signorina. It's getting cold." I drank. He stayed on the balcony a while longer after I went in. I looked through the glass. Giorgio Castellaneta with his back to me, hands on the railing, the Paris sky lighting up in pink behind him, and something in him so tense it seemed about to break. I thought it was tiredness. I had no map for what it actually was. Night came. I had dinner alone because he locked himself in the office with Vincenzo. I went to bed early. I don't even remember dreaming about Bastian before. I only remember waking up screaming. It was one of those old nightmares, in which he was at the door of my apartment in Philadelphia, with the spare key I had never managed to get back from him, and in the calm way he had of saying, "Let's go home, Zoe," as if he hadn't heard all the times I'd said no. I woke up sitting up in bed, with my hands on my chest, with my heart hammering in my wrist, and the bedroom door opened a crack before my second scream came out. "Zoe." His voice came from the corridor without entering. Just the voice and his shadow drawn in the gap. "Company or silence?" he asked, low. "You choose." I swallowed dryly. I took my hand off my chest. His eyes were on the floor, on the other side of the door, and I understood, even in the dark, that he had decided not to invade that bedroom unless I gave written permission. "Silence," I whispered. He nodded. The door went back to its original position, not locked, but closed. I lay down. I didn't sleep for a long time. At some point in the early morning, I crossed the bedroom barefoot, pressed my ear to the door. He was on the other side. I heard the low breathing, calm, the breathing of a man who had decided to stay awake for me without asking anything in return. I went back to bed. I slept with my hand closed on the pillow. In the morning, I opened the door to go to the bathroom and almost stepped on a glass of water. Next to it, a white handkerchief folded in 3. No embroidery, no initial, nothing. Just the presence of someone who had thought at my door that I might wake up needing it. I stood frozen with the glass in my hand for a whole minute. I felt a ridiculous thing pressing behind my eyes. I pushed the thing down. I told myself, out loud in my head, that men like him didn't leave glasses of water out of fondness. They left them out of duty to protect, out of training. I repeated the line 3 times. I didn't believe even the first. In the afternoon, he was in the library changing his shirt because he had spilled coffee on his cuff. I came in without knocking because I thought it was empty, and stared, in plain light, at the scar on his left shoulder. It was wide. It wasn't a clean scalpel cut. It was a bullet scar, I thought, or from something worse, sewn up without haste somewhere that wasn't supposed to have a doctor. He turned his body to grab the new shirt with a calm that didn't fool me. He knew I had seen. "Sorry," I said from the doorway. "I didn't think it was empty. It's all right." He pulled on the shirt, buttoned 3 buttons with that precision of a man who does everything with the same attention. "What was it?" I asked before thinking. "The scar. Another life. Just that?" He did that half pause I already recognized. He looked at me over his glasses, which he sometimes wore to read, and that were hanging on a black cord. I was inwardly amused that 2 owners of crooked glasses lived in the same house. "Just that," he repeated, lower. I didn't give in. I moved up to the shelf behind him, not because I wanted to push, but because I knew that if I stayed in the doorway, I would back down, and I had already backed down too much in that penthouse. "I'm going back to work," I said. "Madame Aurélie needs me on Wednesday. There's an urgent commission. I'm going. You'll go with Vincenzo." "I'm going. With Vincenzo. I know how to restore manuscripts without security, Don Castellaneta." "I know," he said, and his voice dropped a tone. "But you're not leaving without him." I was half a meter from him now. His body was between me and the shelf of English editions, taller than me, with that presence that wasn't only height, it was density. He looked at my glasses first. Always the glasses first, I had begun to notice, and then at my mouth, and then at my eyes. "All right," I whispered. "With Vincenzo." "All right." Neither of us moved. His breathing was closer than before, and I caught the scent of him. Bergamot, paper, something woody and expensive. His right hand rose, slowly, paused in the air between the 2 of us, and he moved his thumb once in the space, as if he were already tracing the contour of my chin without touching. I tilted my face. It wasn't a decision. It was body. He pressed his forehead to mine for a second, 2 seconds, 3. I felt his breath break against my upper lip, and it was the longest moment of an entire week of moments. His hand found my waist over the blouse, without squeezing, just support, and I heard my own breath come unsteady as if I had climbed stairs. He closed his eyes and whispered something in Italian, so low that I only caught 1 word, "Perdona." Then he stepped back. It was a half step, maybe not even that, but enough for the air to fit again between us. His hand left my waist as if he had decided in the last centimeter not to give me back to myself marked by him. "Vincenzo will take you Wednesday," he said in a low voice. 7 in the morning. "All right." I left the library before my legs decided for me. I crossed the corridor, went into the bedroom, closed the door harder than I needed to. I leaned my forehead against the wood for the 2nd time that week, and told myself, out loud, with that hardness I reserved for the moments when my own mouth threatened to betray me, "He doesn't want you, Zoe Whitcomb. He's protecting you. It's strategy. Men like him don't look at women like you for real. They never have." I repeated it 3 times. I believed half of the 3rd one. On the other side of the door, I heard a very low sound that took me a while to recognize. It was his breathing. He was standing in the corridor, leaning against my door, hand on the doorknob. I knew, without seeing, without needing to open. I knew by the way the doorknob trembled slightly twice under the weight of his thumb, without turning. He stood there for a length of time I couldn't measure. Then he let go, and the sound of his footsteps moved away down the corridor, without my having any courage to open the door to look. Chapter 5. The Catalog Shelf. Wednesday arrived in pale gray over Paris. 2 days had passed since the library, 2 days in which Giorgio and I crossed paths in the corridor like people who know what almost happened and decide not to mention it. I had been up since before dawn, sitting on the edge of the penthouse bed, with crooked glasses on my nose and the little notebook open in my lap. I had counted the minutes between the patrols 3 times. I had rewritten the emergency exit plan in smaller letters, because the old one was beginning to look like the handwriting of a hysterical woman, and I refused to be that woman before coffee. Madame Aurélie had called at 8 on the dot, with the dry voice of someone who hadn't slept well, saying she needed me at the atelier before noon. A collector from Lisbon was demanding immediate appraisal of a French Psalter, and she, alone, with tired eyes and the binding glue burning her fingers, wouldn't manage. She said, For the love you have for books, dear. And I hung up knowing I would go. For the love I had for books. And for the love I was beginning to have for that woman with short white hair who pretended to believe my lies on the phone. Giorgio walked into the living room with his coat open and his hair still damp from the shower. I saw him in the reflection of the glass door before I turned my face. And for a second I forgot the coffee, the Salter, Beauregard, and my own name. He had the kind of presence that filled the room before his body entered. "You're not going to like what I'm about to ask," I said, before he spoke. "Probably not. Beauregard. Aurélie needs me today. French Salter. Collector from Lisbon." Giorgio stopped in the middle of the living room, hands in his trouser pockets, staring at the window, as if the light rain outside were his responsibility. I held my breath, because his silence had weight. It had calculation. It had that Sicilian thing of measuring before cutting. "Vincenzo on the outside," he said, finally, without turning. "Car parked at the curb. You don't go out the service door. You don't cross the street without him. And you come back before nightfall. I'm not a child. You're my responsibility. Is that different?" He turned his face then, and the look that found me had gray and cobalt and something else I couldn't name that morning. I shrugged to hide that I had understood. I picked up the folder, adjusted my glasses on my nose, and left before he could say the thing that would make my knee buckle. Beauregard smelled of glue, old paper, and the bergamot tea Aurélie left to cool on the entrance table. I breathed it in like someone breathing in the first morning of vacation. Vincenzo stayed outside, leaning against a post, with his impeccable dark suit, and the stone patience of someone who had done that 1,000 times in 1,000 different cities. I noticed when I got out of the car that Vincenzo had parked in a specific way. The hood pointed at the exit, the car less than 4 steps from the door, the side mirror adjusted to cover both sides of the street. I also noticed that he spoke on the phone 3 times in 15 minutes, always in Italian, always in a voice so low that the sound didn't reach the storefront. And I noticed a third thing that I kept without processing. There was a second car, black, discreet, parked at the corner of the back street, with someone inside who didn't get out and didn't move. I thought it was a coincidence. I thought Paris was full of black cars with people inside who didn't move. I thought a lot of things that morning. "The flu, dear," Aurélie said, without lifting her head from the appraisal table, "was the most resistant this house has ever seen. I was on the verge of sending flowers and a mass. I was careful. I was certain." She raised her half-moon glasses and looked at me over them. "Salter on the back bench. You handle the collation. I handle the Portuguese man." I worked all morning without thinking. My hands remembered the work before my head asked. I marked foxing, noted the break in the spine, compared the colophon ink with the back ink, and breathed slowly through my mouth so as not to dampen the parchment. It was the first hour in 2 weeks in which I was the woman I had been before the elevator. Aurélie passed behind me around 3, set a cup of tea beside me, and said quietly, without looking at Vincenzo through the window, "The man outside has well-made shoes. He has several well-made things." I answered. "I imagine," she murmured, and went back to the Portuguese. The sun went down early, as it does in Paris at the end of fall. The atelier lights came on in a yellow flare that made the parchment look like honey. I closed the collector's folder, jotted down the last observation, and was beginning to adjust the glasses on my nose when I heard the dry click of the front door's latch, and Vincenzo's voice, 3 tones below normal, cutting the air like an ice knife. "Signorina, get back inside. Now." I looked. That was the mistake. 3 men on the narrow sidewalk, one the size of the door. The middle one with his face covered by a high collar. The third with his hand inside his coat, the arm already coming out. Their car pulled up at the curb with the engine still running, the trunk open. Darkness inside the darkness. I didn't freeze. That was the thing that surprised me most in the months that followed. I didn't freeze. "Aurélie!" I screamed with my whole throat. "Lock the back door! Lock the door! Lock it now!" And I threw my shoulder into the catalog shelf. The shelf was old oak, tall to the ceiling, full of leather binders with 20 years of cataloging. It came down like a tree. It came down on the Beauregard's door, came down on the sidewalk, came down between me and the man with the high collar who had already taken 3 steps in. The binders fell open in mid-air and flew like blind birds. I heard the glass of the door crack. I heard Vincenzo shout something in Italian that I didn't translate. Hands. Big hands on my ribs on my arm, on my wrist. Someone pulled me by the hair. Someone pulled me by the waist. I bit the wrist that tried to cover my mouth. bit with the full strength of a woman who at 15 had buried her father and at 22 had left a man who called her little. I bit until I tasted copper. The man roared. He let go. I fell on the wet sidewalk. My knee tore on the stone. My glasses flew off. I saw everything blurred, but I saw. I saw Vincenzo take down the first man with 2 clean movements. I saw the Don's black car come down the street the wrong way, as if the street were his. I saw Giorgio step out of that car before it had even stopped. It wasn't a run. It wasn't haste. It was a march. It was that thing men like him have of walking as if the asphalt drew back for them. He had taken off his coat in the middle of the way over. He had his white shirt open at the collar. He had something in his hand I didn't want to identify. The man who had bitten me tried to flee. Giorgio caught him in 3 steps. There was no drama. There was a short, dry sound of something breaking from inside. The man fell sitting against the wall of the Belregard, alive, panting, with his arm hanging at the wrong angle. Giorgio knelt in front of him. "You're going to go back to Lefebvre," he said, in French, slowly, in a voice I had never heard before. "You're going to tell him I said goodbye. You're going to tell him that next time there will be no one left to send a message. Did you understand?" The man nodded. He had blood on his mouth. "Repeat it." The man repeated it, in trembling French. Giorgio stood up without touching him again. The other man, the one with the high collar, was on the ground 3 meters away, and I understood without needing to look again that one wouldn't be going back anywhere. The violence had been surgical. No screaming, no foaming, no waste. I trembled. I didn't faint. I trembled. Aurélie hugged me at the door of the atelier, with the binders scattered like dead leaves, and I let her. She smelled of bergamot and old leather. She said into my ear, quietly, "Breathe deep, dear. Breathe like the air were expensive." I breathed. Vincenzo exchanged 3 sentences with Giorgio in Italian. Giorgio ran his thumb along my lip, found blood, and his face closed into something I didn't know how to read. Aurélie held my face with both hands. Her fingers were stained with binding glue. Her nails were short. Her skin was thin, the skin of a woman who had worked with her hands for 40 years. She looked at my lip, looked at my knee bleeding through the torn pants, looked at my eyes. She didn't ask if I was all right. She asked something better. "Did you bite?" "I bit. Hard. Tasted copper." She nodded once, dry, as if I had passed a test she hadn't told me existed. Then she looked at Giorgio, who was standing 2 meters away with another man's blood on his sleeve and the controlled breathing of someone who saves rage for later. The 2 of them measured each other for a full second. Aurélie was 30 centimeters shorter and 30 years older and didn't blink. "Did you bring her here knowing this could happen?" she asked, in French, in the voice I knew from the atelier, the voice of a woman who appraises a folio by its stitching before opening it. Giorgio didn't answer. His silence was the answer. Aurélie understood. "I see," she said, and the word carried the weight of a sentence. "Take her. See to the knee before the pants. And, Don Castellaneta," she paused in a way that I felt in my spine, "if it happens again near my books, I'll call people you would prefer didn't know me." I didn't know if she was bluffing. By Giorgio's face, neither did he. And that was the thing about Aurélie. Nobody ever knew. "Car," he said. Just that. Now, at the penthouse, I sat on the sofa without taking off my coat. My hands wouldn't stop. They felt like another person's hands, connected to me by a slack thread. Giorgio closed the door of the living room, dismissed Vincenzo with a wave, and crossed the rug slowly, as if I were capable of breaking. He knelt in front of me, not in front of the sofa, in front of me. I pulled my body away. It was the first time I really pulled away from him. Not with words, not with sarcasm, but with my entire torso retreating into the sofa, as if he were the dangerous thing, because he was. "No," I said, and the word came out rough, ugly, without the polish of a woman who speaks 3 languages and adjusts her glasses. "Don't kneel. Don't do that. You're not good. You broke that man's arm like someone breaking a branch. I saw it. I heard the sound. My voice trembled, but it didn't stop. I'm not the woman who looks at that and finds it romantic. I'm the woman who slept 10 years with the light on because of a violent man. I know what violence does. I know the shape it has." He didn't get up. He stayed kneeling, with his hands on his own thighs, and he took it. He took every word like someone bearing a weight he deserved to carry. "I know," he said. "You don't know." "I know," he repeated lower. "And even so, I'm going to stay here until you decide if I get up or stay." I swallowed. The trembling came down from my chest into my hands. I looked at my hands that had knocked over a shelf and bitten a wrist. and held 15th century manuscripts without trembling, and now they trembled because of a kneeling man asking me permission to stay. The anger didn't go away. Anger never goes away when you grow up with it, but it made room. It made a room the size of a white handkerchief folded in 3 on the door of a bedroom. "Stay," I said. He stayed. On the floor, at my knees, with the expensive suit pressed against the carpet, and the white shirt stained with something I didn't want to name. He took my crooked glasses off my face with the care of a watchmaker, set them down on the arm of the sofa, looked me in the eyes without the glasses for the first time. "May I?" he asked low. I didn't know what he was asking. I said yes anyway. He pulled a white handkerchief from the inside pocket of his blazer, folded it into quarters with calm, and pressed it to the corner of my lip. The blood was not much, but it was there. His thumb trembled. I swear it trembled, before steadying itself. "I'm sorry," he said. The voice came out broken, not hoarse, broken, like fine glass that nobody notices until they pick it up. "For what?" "For your having seen this." I stared at his face, the gray eyes with the cobalt inside, the hard line of the jaw that still bore a small red mark from when I had kissed him in that elevator. He was kneeling in front of me with another man's blood on his sleeve, and he was apologizing to me for having seen it. "I've seen it before," I said, and my voice came out without strength, without breath, but it came out. "I've seen a man be violent. At 14, at 15, at 22. Bastian didn't hit me. He didn't have to. He had his words." I swallowed. "But I had never seen a man be violent for me." Giorgio closed his eyes. "It's always against," I continued, and I noticed I was talking to the ceiling, and to him, and to me, all at once. Against the mother, against the daughter, against the bride who answered wrong at dinner. It's the violence that decides who sleeps with the hallway light on. I touched my fingers to his wrist, slowly, and his wrist was steady. The first time I see a man lose control on my account, he's losing it to protect me. I don't know what to do with that information. "You don't have to do anything." "I do." He opened his eyes. I pressed my forehead to his forehead, and this time neither of us pulled away. It was the third, almost. It was the almost that stopped being almost. My breathing found his breathing and stayed. His hand rose along the back of my neck, settled there with the weight of a man who learned too early to measure his own strength. I smelled the linen of his shirt and the trace of bergamot I had brought in my hair from Aurélie's atelier, and for a second the entire penthouse felt too small for what fit between the two of us. He spoke first, because I was too cowardly to speak first. "You need to know who I am," he said. "Before anything that comes now, you need to know." I sat up better. He stayed kneeling. "Castellaneta," he began, in the low voice that was his for serious matters. "Sicilian family, Cosa Nostra. Don since I was 28 when my father died. Before that, I was a Don's son, which is the same only with less weight on the hand. I have old blood. I have new blood. I have things I'm not going to tell you today because you're still trembling, and I'm not going to use the tremor to hide truth." He swallowed. "The alliance with the Marchettis has interests that involve you in a way I'm going to handle, and that you can't yet know. But I swear on this scar you saw that you are safe with me. As long as I breathe, no one touches you again." I looked at the shoulder covered by the white shirt, the shoulder of the other life. "Why do you care?" I asked. He half smiled, without joy, from the corner of his left mouth. "Because you threw yourself at me, signorina." And this time the line didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like an old promise, the kind made in low Latin inside empty churches. It sounded like a man who had waited to say that for much longer than 8 days. I held out my hand, first, before him, before thinking. His hand met mine in the air, and the grip was slow, decided, with no possible withdrawal. I chose to stay. Chapter 6. Without the hallway light. I held his face with both hands, fingers over the stubble that had begun to appear over the course of the day, thumbs on the cheekbones, palms warm against the cold skin of a Paris night that was coming in through the cracks of the balcony. I rested my forehead against his forehead. I smelled his scent up close, without mediation, without the fear that had mediated everything for the entire week. "You're lying," I whispered. "About something. I know." Giorgio closed his eyes. His lashes were dark and longer than a man like him had any right to have. "I know," I repeated, and my voice came out steady in a way that surprised me. "But today I don't want to know." He took a deep breath. It was the kind of breath men like him don't allow in public, the kind that says the chest is too full. "Zoe, not today, Giorgio." And then, finally, he kissed me. It wasn't the kiss in the elevator. It wasn't the theater of my mouth against his jaw with Bastian passing through the door. It was a controlled kiss. Slow, decided, in the way that he decided everything, weighing first, committing later. His hand rose along my neck the way it had risen in the living room earlier, but now it stayed. His thumb traveled across my cheek once, slowly, as if he were testing whether the gesture was permitted in new land. It was. When he pulled back, it was only a centimeter, just enough to look in my eyes without my glasses in the way. "Come," he said. He held out his hand. I took it. He led me by the hand down the corridor I had timed so many times in the little notebook, opened the door of the bedroom that was his, and that had never been his to me. He turned off the hallway light with his shoulder pressing against the switch, and the door closed. Morning came in Paris the way Paris comes, when it forgives those who have lived there a long time. Slowly, pale gray turning to old gold, light spreading across the white sheet, before we understood it was light. I opened my eyes on the ceiling before opening my eyes on the bedroom. The ceiling was the same as before. The bedroom was different. His white shirt, tossed onto the armchair by the window. My crooked glasses on the nightstand, folded with a watchmaker's care. The sound of him speaking low Italian in the office on the other side of the wall. 3 sentences. Pause. 2 more sentences. Pause. I smiled at the ceiling, and it was in that smile that I noticed. The hallway light was off. It had been off all night. I had slept without it for the first time in 10 years, and my body hadn't woken up at 3, or at 4, or at 5, or at the exact points where it had woken up since I was 15. I didn't cry, but my breathing went strange for a second. The kind of strange that someone who lost their father early knows. A small split inside, an old window that opens after years of being stuck. I touched my hand to my belly, for no reason, just to feel the sheet against my skin, and the silence of the entire building. It was Sunday morning, I remembered. It was Sunday morning in Paris, and the bread was coming out of the ovens 800 meters from there, and my life was going on, against all bets. The bedroom door opened soundlessly. Giorgio came in with a cup in one hand, and the rare edition of Les Fleurs de Mal in the other. He was in black trousers and a white dress shirt open at the first 2 buttons, barefoot, his hair still damp. He paused at the door to look at me before actually coming in. The kind of look men like him don't give easily, and that I recognized finally, without pretending not to recognize it. "Good morning," he said low. "Good morning." He sat on the edge of the bed, held out the cup. I took it. It was at the right temperature, with the exact amount of milk I drank at the bakery counter in Le Marais. Not a drop more, not a drop less. I looked at the cup, and then at him. "How?" I asked. "I watched you drink it 3 times, he answered without looking away. The second time I already knew. I smiled despite myself, took a sip. It was perfect. He set the book on the sheet, between the 2 of us. He didn't say anything about the book. I didn't say anything either. The gift remained what it was. A first edition, an apology not asked for. The sweetest gift anyone had given me in 25 years of life. "Aurélie called," he said. "She said the Belregard needs time to put the catalog shelf back together, but that if you can stop in Tuesday afternoon, she'll take it. I said yes for you. I hope that's all right." "It is. Bastian," he continued, more grave, lost track of what he can and can't do. "I took care of it. His father still exists, but his father has his own concerns at this moment." He looked at the sheet, chose his words. "The Marchettis are on pause. I'm going to settle what was left on the table that night, and I'm going to settle it without using you as currency for anything. That I promise. I believe you." He looked me in the eyes. I really did believe. "Today you rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll talk about whatever you need. Then we'll see the rest." "No marriage," I teased quietly, with the cup at my mouth. He half smiled, from the corner of his left mouth, the same way he had smiled kneeling on the living room floor the night before. "No marriage for now. No children. No children for now. No big promises. Only small ones," he said. "The small ones I keep." I leaned in and kissed the shoulder of his white shirt. It was one of those kisses that don't ask permission, the everyday ones, the kind that seem to belong to 2 months together, and not to 2 weeks, and that say more about the time still to come than about the night that has already been. He rested his chin on the top of my head and breathed in my hair as if breathing in my hair were part of his routine for much longer than it had been. The penthouse kitchen was white and cold marble, with that French thing of having more counter than necessary. I walked in barefoot, in one of his dress shirts that I had grabbed from the armchair because my blouse was still in the bedroom. Giorgio came in behind, with his cup this time, and his hand on my waist as if he had gotten used to it too quickly. Vincenzo was already there, in a dark suit, of course, reading the French newspaper at the counter as if he understood every word, and probably did. He raised his eyes to the two of us. He didn't move a muscle in his face. "Dawn," he said, in Italian, in his dry stone voice. "Vincenzo, in 20 years I've never seen you up before coffee." Giorgio answered something in Italian that I didn't catch all of, but I caught the tone of a man caught out by an old friend. Vincenzo turned the page of the newspaper without commenting further, but before turning, he looked at me for a quarter of a second, with that half-Sicilian smile that fit in 3 millimeters of corner of mouth, and said in French, "Good morning, signorina. The bread is in the basket." I laughed. It was a small laugh, breathless, but it was real laughter, the first in many days. I sat on the high stool at the counter. Giorgio leaned his hip against the marble next to me. Vincenzo turned another page. The day came in through the high kitchen window, hitting the stone floor, warming the hem of the shirt I had borrowed. It was at that exact second that it happened, not like the first time, in the car, when I tucked the question into the inner notebook, and told myself that I must have mentioned the last name without remembering. This time it came differently. It came with weight, in the elevator, on that first day. Before I had said anything, before I had taken the air out of a whisper, before I had explained to him who the man was who had passed by the door, Giorgio had said the full name, had said Lefebvre, had said Bastien Lefebvre, like someone who had the name catalogued somewhere long before that afternoon. How? I set the cup on the marble. I looked at his profile. He was reading something over Vincenzo's shoulder, with his eyebrow slightly furrowed, with his hand still on my back, with his thumb tracing a small circle on the fabric of the shirt that was his. The question stayed on my mouth for 2 whole seconds. This time it hurt more to swallow, because this time I wasn't scared or confused or trapped in a car with the smell of leather. I was happy, and happiness made the question more dangerous, not less. I knew that. I knew it with the part of me that had slept 10 years with the light on, the part that doesn't forget. Even so, I kept it. I didn't shoo it away. I kept it, with both hands, in the same inner notebook where I noted patrols and emergency exits, because I was going to need that question whole, intact, on the day the answer could no longer wait. Giorgio noticed something. He turned his head, raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Everything," I answered. I leaned in, kissed his shoulder again, in the same place as the previous kiss, with my whole mouth. He pressed his lips to the top of my head for just 1 second. Vincenzo turned the page once more. Outside, Paris was beginning to truly dawn. The hallway light was still off. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. 3 weeks of peace were enough for me to make the worst mistake of my life. Believing him, Giorgio brought me coffee as if he had known me forever. He kissed my forehead as if I were precious, slept beside me as if there were no blood, debts and lies between us. I thought he had saved me. The elevator, the rescue, the touch on my waist. None of it had been chance. I wasn't his love. I was the next move. That early morning, I looked at Giorgio sleeping and understood the cruelest part. The man who made me feel safe might be the danger I should have run from the start, until the photograph fell out of the book he had given me. Me, at 16, smiling at graduation, and him, younger, on the other side of the street, watching me. On the back, in Italian, the sentence that destroyed my heart: "The debt begins here, and you're going to pay me dearly." My hands went cold, my chest sank. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.